So welcome everybody. My name's Claire and I'm part of a group who are going to come together through PD North to talk about practitioner research. And we know some of you can't be here today, so this recording is for those of you who are going to catch into the second meeting. We'll tell you those dates at the end. And to welcome you and to say we really look forward to meeting you next time. You'll see all our pictures are on the screens here. It's really helpful if you come, that you can come with your webcam on so that we can get to know each other a bit better. I'm going to pass to my right. Now, you don't know that, you're sitting on my right, but that's Joanne Mills. So if you want to say who you are, where you are, and maybe what you were hoping to do in this group. What was it attracted you to joining this group?
I have absolutely no idea. First of all, I'm Joanne, I've got cases. I'm a lead practitioner with a background in research. So I don't really know. I'm just interested to find out who's doing what, how good it is, and basically how I can learn from others.
Andy, do you want to say hi next and tell people who you are?
Hi, I'm Andy Convery. I have a background in and a great interest in further ed, and especially how teachers do action research into improving further education and all aspects of the lifelong learning sector. And I'm here to try and infect everybody who joins with a similar enthusiasm for action research.
Thank you. Vicky?
Hello, I'm Vicky Butterby, and I'm speaking from Scottish Highlands at the moment, which is where I've just moved to. I am a community learning teacher by trade. Andy and Claire have indeed infected me with the action research bug, and I've absolutely thoroughly enjoyed doing bits of action research with the team. And as Claire said before, I now work with Claire and Joe, and I'm really excited about this group because it means that I'll get opportunity not only to engage in some research but also to support others who are new to research and things like that. So I'm very, very excited to be here.
Thanks, Vicky. And last but not least, right the way round on my left, Joe.
Hi, I'm Jo, and I'm helping out with this project. I'm here today just purely to take the register and to help out if there's any technical difficulties. And I'm really pleased to be part of it.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, I'm going to pop some slides up on the screen, which will give us some slides to talk to. And then we will take a break about halfway through the meeting just to go and stretch our legs and get some fresh air. And we're going to go through until 5 o'clock today, and we'll do that another 3 times. So I'll talk about the dates for the meetings at the end of this one. Okay, let me go and grab my slides. So we're not going to just go through slides today, but I thought it might be quite helpful to have some to take us through some of the key points. So let's go from here, and I'm about to take over your screens. So you've met the people who are going to be facilitating this meeting, and we've got one group member here, Joe, so we're really pleased, Joanne, that you've come, but we are expecting a few more, and it would be really nice when you join and we've decided what our sharing space is going to be, if you could just say who you are, what you do, just so that we can get to know each other before we come back to the next meeting. PD North, or Professional Development North, operates across the whole of the north of England, and it's what the Education Training Foundation call a professional exchange network. And there are PENs, or professional exchange networks, in every region of England. And we have a little branch out into Scotland with you up there, Vicky, so we're being a UK-wide network in that respect. I'm going to send these slides out to you after the session. In fact, I'll put them in our sharing space, and we're going to decide together what that will be. But if you want to then click on any of the links after the session to find out about OTLA projects, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that today as well. where you can get CPD, more information about other events that are taking place. Just follow those links on the screen. And really this is just to show that professional exchange networks fit into a bigger picture of support that the ETF fund. So we are part of a national programme, as I said before, and really PD North is about working together, whatever role we're in. It might be that we work across the sector, like some of us now who aren't located in a particular organisation. We work for colleges, ACLs, work-based learning, big employers. And rather than being a formal CPD programme, it's a programme where you choose what you're going to work on, come together with a group of peers and share your work, and where sometimes work together on aspects. The best way to think about this is to give an example. So last year, a group of prison practitioners who are located across the north of England and don't necessarily work together because they're isolated in their prisons, wanted to find out more about mental well-being. They formed a professional exchange network. They tried things out with learners. And they started off with a problem. And the problem was that they were going into classes and learners were sitting under their jumpers, which if you've ever taught in a prison will be quite familiar to you. It's just trying to escape. What can we do to help people who are feeling that overwhelmed and that unhappy that they want to sit in a session under their jumper? And that bring people out to feel confident became the problem they were trying to work on together. And I'll share with you in a little minute what they made, and it was quite it changed a few hearts and minds in the prison service as to the kind of things that should be going on in the classroom. So that's why we say it's built by practitioners for practitioners, and we try to keep the cost as low as possible. So organisations will pay a nominal fee, maybe £100 a year. For that, they can have practitioners from across the organisation take part. And then these groups have to be free at point of entry. That's the idea. So, as I said, we come across the whole of the north, so we have little regions. We're doing a cross-regional one this time because we wanted to be able to meet in Zoom. It doesn't matter that I'm in Liverpool and you're up there in Gateshead, Joanne. We can still get together, and actually we've really proved our mettle by being able to reach to you up in the Highlands, Vicky. And ETF are our funders. So, this is the last time I'm going to fill the screen with words. I just want you to have this as a record that you can take back with you afterwards. So we're going to have 4 meetings. That's the exchange cycle. We are going to ask you towards the end to think about the professional standards that you might have developed. The ETFs have published those professional standards for about 3 years now. In fact, maybe longer. 2014, they've been around for a while now. And then we're just going to be together while you carry out some development work, projects. And I don't want to say too much about that because I don't want to shape your idea of what these projects might look like before we get started. It may be that you want to keep a reflective journal just to jot things down as they occur to you. That's really good practice when you're doing a project like this. Ultimately, it would be brilliant if you could share your work beyond this group, although you might think that sharing with this group is just enough, but it might be that you can then go back to your organisation and say, look, I tried this out with these learners and this is the difference it made. So you might find you're able to influence others in your organisation, other colleagues from across the region. In fact, the sky's the limit. So we're going to support you in that respect to share what you find if you feel you want to. And there's no pressure to do anything. It's entirely up to you. And there's some regional events, and they're taking place in May. So there'll be one in the northeast, one in the northwest, and one in Yorkshire and Humberside. Again, we'll share some dates with you at the end. And as a PD North member, then we will fully fund your place at those events. So let's move along. Okay. Not sure about the colouring on here. I've now looked at red and purple and I'm not quite happy with that, but it feels readable. So I just want to take us around this clock. So in meeting 1, which is now, we're going to be thinking about a theme or a subject that you might want to investigate. Sometimes you could see it as a challenge or a problem, or just something which you've got a feeling might work with learners and think, oh, I'd like to try this out. We're going to think about the professional standards that you might note down and monitor yourself against across the programme. And then between meeting 1 and 2, in that first red box at the top of the screen, we'll ask you to think about planning your intervention. Again, I really had to think about the word to use there, and I'm going to pass over to Andy to make more sense of that. I'm not sure if we'd call it an intervention or a topic or an experiment. Andy, what are you thinking? Don't forget your mute. Andy, don't forget to unmute yourself. Andy? Just do the unmute.
Sorry about that. Yes, activity is a word that I think teachers like.
Right, we're going to change it. So plan your activity. I think teachers like it too.
Yeah.
So, right, let's go back. Like that better too. In meeting 2, you'll share outcomes of your thinking. I'm going to maybe not say investigations, but look, you can hear me stumbling over language here. It's not because anybody's saying, oh, we should call it an activity, not an intervention. It's because we think so much about how language can become a barrier to people taking part in things. It can become something that seems daunting because we've used a word that seems like it's out of your skill set. And so that's why you feel me fumbling around with language, because I really want to make sure that this is as inclusive as possible. And it's shortly when I pass over to Andy, and Andy, you've done so much work in this area using language that's accessible. I definitely defer to a higher authority when it comes to how we talk about what we do. So we're going to think in meeting 2, what is it that you've planned? What are your ideas? Maybe you've already tried something out with a couple of learners and you've had some findings. What does that mean? And how are you going to carry on finding out if this is making a difference or not? And then between meeting 2 and 3, again, you carry on, try things out, see if they work, reflect on what's happened in the classroom with learners or out of the classroom if you're doing something in a different setting. And then come back on meeting 3 again and share. And these meetings then become a point where we're coming back with our peers and saying, I tried this out and I think it's really interesting. And someone might say, well, I've tried it out doing it this way. So we're building our knowledge together. We know that everybody's project will look different. Everybody's activity is going to be different, but that's quite natural. In between meeting 3 and 4, we do the same, but this time you might be thinking, I want to start thinking about sharing my findings now. How am I going to do this? Would I want to write a blog? Do I want to draw it up? Do I want to write on a single side of A4 what's happened so that I've got something that I can share, not just with close colleagues, but potentially with anybody in the FE sector? But again, that's going to be entirely up to you. You can share as widely or as narrowly as you wish. And then finally, after meeting 4, we'll say, well, what do you want to do? It might be that there are OTLA opportunities and you want to apply for some funding. It may be that you think, I'm onto something here. I'd like to do this again, but I'd like to do it with more or different learners. And all the time we'll be here supporting you. So does that make sense?
Definitely. Definitely, yes. Yes, it's... I think that's a really, really interesting cycle, because I think in the reality of teachers' lives, a lot of the pink squares, oblongs, the pink oblongs are shown as individual activities, and people will be sharing in the purple oblongs, but they'll also probably be doing some local sharing in the pink ones, and it could be with a range of people. It could be with the support assistant in the classroom. It could be with a colleague teaching a different subject, even in the staff room. They could, like many teachers, trap their partners in long discussions about it. But I think quite often the reflection part of it, which we all do a lot of the time, is greatly enhanced if we can discuss it almost in private discussions at first. And I think they're so important, and then that helps the wider sharing in meetings 2, 3, and 4. And all these will build up. The more you share at all the different stages, the easier it becomes and the more confidence you have to realise that this final share your work beyond the exchange group was a real value and is worth giving time to, and finding your own way of your own forms of expression for the particular groups to whom you're trying to communicate. So I think that would be something really worth exploring when we get round there.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, so let's carry on and start to think about some examples of what people have done in the past. And this is just to give you some, again, this don't take this as having to shape what you do, but just some ideas to get you thinking. So I talked to you about the work that the prisons had done, so we called it the Mindful Toolkit, and that ended up being a series of activities and approaches that you can use in classrooms that break the cycle of negative thoughts. And I can imagine being a prisoner, that's quite a big part of your life, and help you just to stop thinking along those lines, breathe, take a bit of time before you can get on with something else. And honestly, some of these approaches had been looked down on in prison education. Sometimes people were even chastised for using these approaches because they weren't seen as proper educational activities. But within that box is stuff that could be much, much closer to maths or English, and stuff that's just about taking your mind off things. And what was really interesting was the prisoners' findings. So the teachers used this, and the learning support assistants used this with prisoners, and got a really good sense of what they liked best and what worked best, so that they ended up with a priority list of things they could use in their own classrooms, and influence not just the education side, but also the prison side, who are the ones who can say, yes, we'll buy something like this in and it will be useful. In Yorkshire and Humberside, a group were looking at digital approaches, and they developed some digital ILPs. So you can see here a little poplet. It's a way of sharing information, like a pop-out mind map. And after the session, if you want to see that, you can click that link and look at it in more detail. And they were particularly thinking about digital approaches for formative assessment or assessment for learning. And now, I don't know if you know about this work, Joanne. Have you seen? Now, that's really interesting. There was some work that was done as part of an early years professional exchange in a very big college where one of you lives. And yet we know that the sharing hasn't reached in, but has reached out. So that's quite telling, isn't it? And Andy, your point earlier about sharing with people in your organisation in quite an informal way, perhaps we need to sharpen that a little bit, because Joanne, you should have heard about this at staff development days. You should know. So we need to go and get your early years colleagues and say, oh yeah, I found out you were doing something really interesting. What was it you were doing? So, okay, I'm gonna move this along now. So perhaps one of the things you could do before the next meeting, Joanne, is go and knock on the staff room door of early years and see what was going on in there. What did you make that was interesting? Okay, I'm gonna pass over to Andy now, if that's okay, to take us through these next couple of slides, Andy, and just tell me to move on when you're ready for me to move on.
Surely. Yeah. Well, I think that many people will be familiar with the work of Jean McNiff, but she has managed to encapsulate an important point when we are conducting or helping other people to do action research as practitioners. And what's special about practitioner action research is that building on conventional research, which asks what's happening here, practitioner action research asks how can we improve what's happening here. So practitioner research is a very special form of research which enables people who are on the ground, who are actually involved in the action, to investigate it themselves and use research not as a form of knowledge which remains dislocated and separate from activity, but actually informs research, and the action, the activities which build on the research feedback all the time into research. One of the points that you made earlier about language is very important, I think, in practitioner action research, because I think teachers for a long time have been separated from the academics who produce research. I want to say they've been separated. They also separate themselves defensively, and that's quite understandable. So when we look at words like implementation of research in classrooms, teachers might not see themselves as implementing research. They see themselves as trying out activities. And it's a difficult one. Do we reassure teachers that when they're trying out activities, they are implementing research? Because one of the difficulties is that when we simplify the language, do we reinforce the fact that teachers are in a separate category? So I think possibly we might need to use both forms of language. I don't know.
It's really interesting, Andy, because you said that practitioner action research is a special form of research, and I think you're right, because as you said, it's about making that change, which is after all what research is always aiming to do, ultimately, to make the world a better place. But you're doing it very directly. But there's still this idea out there that somehow practitioner research is not quite as good as real research, but it's a ladder through which you can climb until you get to do the real thing, and maybe you work in a university. And it's a really powerful myth, and it's a myth that is perhaps reinforced by people whose job is to be in that position in a university. And I don't speak for everybody. There's some fantastic colleagues out there doing brilliant stuff, saying Jean herself was located in universities for years. But then the question of language is, do we reclaim our right to be seen as proper researchers by using that language, or do we say, let's speak in plain English and let other people work to come to us? Yeah, I think you're right. Both is perhaps the answer, Andy.
Yeah. So the emphasis in research is about the action that we take, how we get directly involved. It's not just about finding out knowledge, though we do find out knowledge by trying things out. We do generate new knowledge and we do generate new theory, but the emphasis is on being actively involved. Okay then, so can we move on to the next? So basically, if you are a practitioner researcher or you're considering doing practitioner research, these are the questions that might well be worth asking. I'll let you read those for a second. And just looking at that first question, what change would you like to introduce to your teaching? I struggled with that word change this morning and wondered whether, should I call it activity? Should I call it innovation? And basically, as a teacher, quite often you want to try something new because what you're doing is working, but there are ways to make it work better. So this is what we're looking at. What innovation, what addition would you like to introduce? And I think that's important. There's an emphasis in that question, which I've written, in the second person there, would you like to introduce? Because I think it is a very personal question. You're the expert in your classroom. It doesn't mean that everything you think is right when I say you're the expert, but you've got a more informed perspective than people from the outside who don't know the students, who probably don't know the institution, and who don't have your unique understanding. That doesn't mean your understanding can't be improved by discussion with others. And I think the second question for practitioner researchers is important. What suggests that the change would be worthwhile? And it's quite important, the worthwhileness of an activity, because it's all about, I think, proper practitioner action research, or shall I say the most valuable practitioner action research, is action research which builds on the values of the human beings who decide to teach, to make a difference in people's lives by doing worthwhile things. So one of the difficulties with action research is that sometimes people might want to bring in a new technology, and they ask people to do some action research with the technology. And it could be that the teachers don't think that technology is particularly worthwhile, but they've got to do something because they've been told to. And this often shows through the research. It lacks the personal element. So I think whenever possible, if you do have to maybe, or you are expected to bring in something like some new technology or some external change, maybe if you can personalize as much as possible, it becomes how can I make this technology work as effectively as possible with these learners in this classroom, remembering that.
I was just thinking, Andy, when you say about that's kind of a balance that you take all the time as a teacher. I'm going to do this too. I'd like to do some practitioner research as part of this group, and I've been thinking, and we'll share our ideas in a minute, but it's not because I thought this would make a difference. It's because I'm trying to deal with an issue that's come from the outside, and I'm looking at it and thinking, this is something we have to do, but can I make it worthwhile? So there's kind of a balance there of something external thing that's saying, Claire, you need to look at this, and you need to look at it as part of the courses that you run. But then part of me that thinks, okay, I accept I need to look at it, but I'm only going to do it if it makes a difference to the people I work with. So I'm walking that balance between someone else telling me that, but also me trying to shape it to make it worthwhile. So I think that's a really good point you make, Andy. It's not always the case that you can just sit there kind of in the ether and think, I've picked this idea and I'm going to try it out. There's other stuff that influences us too.
Thank you. I'm conscious that this is being recorded and might go to a wider audience. So I'm going to add a question or an aspect that hasn't been mentioned, and that is about evidence, what research is and the evidence that we use. Well, if we take research to mean not just studies that are done in places of higher education, in laboratories, but research is systematic enquiry that is made public for testing, that one of the things about practitioner research is that the way that we test the value of our activities and provide evidence is, a good test is, would another teacher look at what I've done and see that the change that I had brought in was likely to be worthwhile? And it's this final question: how would you persuade your colleagues that planned change had been effective? And I can't think of a better rule of thumb than that. I mean, one form of persuading your colleagues is simply by telling them. And we do this a lot with our tips and techniques that we picked up over the years, where we say, oh, you've got to try this, or this strategy worked really well with my students. We offer recipe tips, etc. But I think what is the difference between research and reflective practice is research is more systematic. So we have decided we were going to try something that was worthwhile, and we now try and gather some evidence of that the change was worthwhile. Now, in a perfect world, it would always be because the students did tests which gave us scores which were much higher than the lesson that we did before we used that strategy. But of course, on the grounds that you can't teach the same lesson twice, or if you did do, what was so wrong with the first time you taught it that it needed teaching a second time? We look for different types of evidence. And basically for evidence, we're looking at evidence that can be credible with your colleagues. So I think this might take us on to the next slide. So if you're planning some research into your practice, my advice to produce very effective, manageable research is to keep it small. By the way, these tips have been largely stolen from people like David Hopkins, Teacher's Guide to Classroom Research. So first of all, keep it manageable. You're far better looking at a strategy across 1 or 2 sessions. Don't try something over a whole term if you want to monitor it, because you're busy enough as a teacher. If you try something across 1 or 2 sessions, you'll get such a wealth of evidence and such a wealth of byproducts from that lesson and such a wealth of responses from your learners that you will find very difficult to keep a structure beyond that. So first of all, try and limit what you do to 1 or 2 sessions. Choose an innovation which excites you. And I use the word excite deliberately. Make it something which stimulates you, because if it doesn't stimulate you as a teacher, it's highly unlikely to stimulate your learners. There is an argument that if you're choosing something which you want to succeed in any case, how can that possibly be objective? Well, we don't try for objective research in action research or practitioner research because our aim is to improve the students' learning. So we're biased in favour of improving student experience. And if we do bias the results and the students learn more than they were meant to because we were excited, then that's a win-win situation, undoubtedly. The third point is discuss with colleagues wherever possible. And this is the point that I emphasised earlier. I'm a little worried about reflection. That reflection is too often seen as an individualistic, a solitary activity. And the problem with reflection is that we are emotional rather than cognitive human beings. And just having somebody telling you when something's gone wrong in your eyes, you know, what great strides you did make until you hit that barrier, makes all the difference between you keeping going and trying again. So do discuss with colleagues. And colleagues also, especially if they're good colleagues, are likely not to be critical friends, but to be constructive friends, to be able to be constructively critical and suggest quite sensitively where you might make further developments. for 10 years when I was at Sunderland, I was nominally in charge of a group of 10 to 15 teacher trainers from the colleges. And over those years, they became expert at nuancing me and finding ways to persuade me of what was really important. And I came out with some brilliant ideas after I talked to them. I learned so much from them. So whenever you can discuss with colleagues, it's good for your mind and it's good for your heart as well. So do that. When I say link your activity with other initiatives, perhaps I could have phrased that better. What I wanted to get away from is the idea, I feel caught in a trap as a teacher, representative in some ways. I don't want teachers to feel they can only do what researchers tell them to do. Nor do I want them to say researchers have nothing to contribute in any way. So when I say link your activity with other initiatives, that if we look at something like the work on formative assessment for learning, assessment as learning, really all the assessment industry, if we look at that, there's been some really useful work done amidst the miles and miles of shelving of research publications on assessment. So try and tie in with an activity such as formative assessment. The initiative need not be recognised as definitive. Quite often people might try things such as, let's say, mindfulness, which in some situations might work really well, but it would be almost impossible to apply it to every situation. So that's a very contextual initiative. But if you can link it to another initiative, then you can claim that your activity is research and evidence-based. Sorry, yes.
That's a point which is quite different from how action research can be presented in the FE sector, with an idea of a cycle where you start off by doing some reading and then you decide on your activity or your intervention, your plan, you put it into place, you see whether it's made a difference. So the idea that rather than before you get started, you have to have read all the latest findings on this subject. What you're saying is actually it might be some published research, a research summary, it might be a guide or just some wisdom from the sector that's linked to what you're doing. And once you've decided what you want to do, it's then's the point where you might just look around you and see if there's anything out there that's interesting, rather than seeing reading as a barrier that you have to get over before you can start thinking about what you want to do. Would you say that that's a perception that you come across when you meet teachers out there thinking about research?
Yes, and I think that part of the problem sometimes is the way we frame it. We ask people at the beginning, before they're doing research, to say, how has research informed your plan? In reality, what we've found, what is reality? No, but from experience, what we found is if we can get, as we have got, say, someone from the vocational construction background to do some formative assessment activities, that teacher has often become quite interested in reading up on formative assessment when he's found out that they work in practice. If we'd asked them to read Inside the Black Box, Working Inside the Black Box Part 2, Further Adventures of the Black Box, etc., then he would never have done anything. So it seems to me that there are different routes. When I say different routes, if I put my other hat on as an editor of a journal, what you realise when you read the finished articles after reviewers have given feedback on them is that much of the initial literature review is written after the research has been written up and rewritten. So these aren't discrete areas at all. You know, it's not a systematic pattern in higher education in the research world. It's simply a conventional way of presenting it.
Yeah. And you could even not do something, because you might decide you're going to. I was thinking about the work on learning support assistants, and there'd been a really big piece of work that had come out of the. I think it was John Hattie's work, which had a meta study which had said, well, actually the impact of using learning support assistants can be negligible, and had you read that before you started on a project, it could have been a reason why you thought, I'm not going to go down this line, because gosh, that's very sound findings, that's published and it's quantified. But actually, by trying things out, you realise that you can do something which is quite different to the premises that their project set up, and that you shouldn't have been put off, because there's some fantastic work that can be done, and actually, years down the line, that work starts to bump up against those big findings and say, hold on a second, here's another perspective which might be closer to our work in FE.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yeah. Indeed, yeah. And the final point, get learners grounded feedback on their experience. We learn so much from our students. Most of us have learned to be teachers through the feedback, the nuanced feedback which learners have given us over the years. And much of our teaching has probably come across through serendipity, where, I don't know, we'd planned a lesson using the overhead projector, as it was in those days, or the PowerPoint, and the fuse blew. And so we had to try another method. Or people turned up late, so we got the students working in groups and telling each other. So much of what we've done has happened because something happened by mistake and we realised it worked better than the way we had planned it. But what I'm very much against when in getting learners' feedback are surveys of learners. Please let it be grounded in their activities, in their experience, and wherever possible, if we can find ways for them to be able to articulate their experience through talking to each other, through talking to a third party, getting somebody else to talk to them, or simply getting them in small groups so they don't have to perform a role in front of the whole group. That's so important.
We were talking about drawing the other day, Vicky and I, and how sometimes drawing can be a way to help learners express what they think without even feeling they have to be good writers or good orators. And there's quite a nice body of work done in ESOL called Reflect ESOL, which is whole courses set up around the ESOL learners drawing about their communities and trying to imagine new ways of working. So there's a nice history of that too. Shall I move on?
Yes, please. So essentially, now this is where I lapse back into the sort of lecture higher education mode. I realise that I feel I have to give you this as a process and revert to language that teachers wouldn't always use. So quite simply, or I like to think quite simply, the process is, first of all, identify opportunities to improve teaching, experiment with the changes to teaching you're making, try them out, gather evidence from learners' experience, reflect upon what still needs to change, and once again, sharing your experience with peers. So I think, in fact, whereas that's a summary, this final slide, I think if we're short for time, we needn't use it in future.
Andy, thank you. I'm going to suggest that we take a break now, because everyone needs to stretch their legs. We think about probably ought to go and order another cup of tea, Vicky, otherwise they're going to give you Paddington Bear Hardstairs in that cafe. I don't know. And should we take 15 minutes and just go and think, as you're going away, think about what we've said so far. have you got an idea for a project that you might want to do? People who are watching this after the session, I'm going to pause the recording now because I don't want you to have to sit for 15 minutes twiddling your thumbs while the video plays. And it's highly possible I'll forget to press record again, so I'm going to ask everybody to help me remember when we come back to the session to press record. So let me just pause this for a minute. I'm going to stop sharing the slides.
Can I just ask?
Welcome back, everybody. We hope you've had a break, a stretch of your legs, even if you're watching this on video. Don't forget your health and safety behind the screen. We were, just before we pressed record, we were just reflecting on a couple of things before we started again this afternoon, and we were thinking about how an example of some action research carried out might be really beneficial, just to help you imagine what this could look like. And what we're going to do is, when we send this recording out, we'll send out Amanda's story. And Amanda was developing some ideas around numeracy, and it's just a one-page description of her journey and what she did and what she found. So it may well be that what you want to do, instead of watching the video first, you want to read that story, and it's just very short, and then come into the video with an idea already of what this could look like. It can be quite helpful for people to have a specific example to hook all these ideas on. We have quite a lot of these kind of stories from the work we've done over the last few years. So if you think, oh yeah, I get that, but I still want something else, and just ask us, because we can probably send you other examples, no problem at all. So we'd like to now think about what it is you're going to do. And you may well not know yet, or you may have come into this with an idea. And I wondered if I might get the ball rolling by sharing something that I've got in mind. Now, if you have not come up with something yet, or you're still thinking, don't worry, that's part of what today's about. But I've had a challenge that I needed to surmount recently. And people come along to training courses, and to me that's just the same as a classroom. So I see, when I do training, I think I'm being a teacher. That's what I am, that's my identity, and I try and practice all the things I would do in any other classroom. But the difference is we're often only together for a day, and I worry that that could just be a kind of trainer rolls in, does a day of delivery, delivers her parcel to the trainees, who may or may not receive the parcel in the way that she expects, and trainer gets out of there quick, and what's everybody left with? And is it learning, or is it just having had loads of information passed to them? And I try my best to make it learning, and to do assessment activities at the start together to find out what we know. And I say to everyone, you know, we're working together. I might not know as much as you about things. Let's form our learning together. I'm still bothered about this idea of a single day. And then I had another challenge in that the ETF, who funds the training that we do, started to tell me off when people didn't turn up to the sessions. They said we weren't meeting our targets. I thought, oh, crikey, well, what am I meant to do about that? I've paid for them to come along, and the trainees don't turn up for any reason. And it's often flipping good reasons, like I've had an abscess in my tooth, or there's no one in to cover the class and I've got to do the business of teaching and learning. So fair enough. And I realised that a way through this would be if we could say people came to a session, if they didn't just come along, but if they got some learning before and some learning afterwards, because then I can say to ETF, they partially attended. And on one level, that means I meet my target, and that bothers me. But on another level, and this is what I was saying about having these two parts of my brain, the thing that triggered this was targets, because I've got to meet them. That's the program I run. Then the other flip side of me says, oh, in conversations with David and Andy, we've always talked about the rhythm of CPD, the fact that a single intervention doesn't make a massive difference. It's the time you often spend. Maybe this is an opportunity for me to reimagine what happens in a single day and pop that in a longer journey. And it will also help me with the problem I have with ETF. But we could do some flipped learning before the session, and then after the session, something to follow up. But my worry is that this could just become a kind of, well, I've asked you to read this, therefore I've done my job, you've done your flipped learning. Here's the slides afterwards, off I go. I want it to be more meaningful than that. And I know a bit about flipped learning, but I've not practiced it as much perhaps as on training. And that's about as far as I've got. So I really want to do a project over this period that looks at how we can change the way that we do training to bring in a flipped element and to see if it works. And I've been running training for years and years, so I really understand what goes on in the classroom. So one of the things that I was thinking about was that, people often ask you, well, how do you know it's made a difference? And I don't want to do one thing to one group and not do it to another, because I'm with you, Andy, on the idea that we're about improving things. So if I truly believe this would be better, why wouldn't I do it to everybody? So gone's the idea of some kind of control group. I don't want to go down that road. That doesn't feel like action research. So yeah, that's what I want to try and work on. I wondered if anybody had an idea they wanted to share too, and then we could start using this space to, perhaps if we were to go around, or in fact, before we do this, how do you want to do this? I'm really do you want to do it like a little circle? I've probably just taken up about 5 minutes, which I should have said we have this amount of time each to make it fair, and then feed back and talk about the idea and then move on to someone else. Is that how we should structure these meetings, do you think? What if somebody's a really big talker and talks for like 30 minutes and we're all thinking, should we set a time limit on it? How should we do it? Because we have the chance now to shape what our meeting's like going forward.
If somebody's going to be a big talker and go on for 30 minutes, I think we'll professionally just cut them off.
Okay.
Can't do that job.
Okay. So we say that we're not going to have a time limit, but we would just all start to give them Paddington Bear hard stares to look at our watches really obviously. What do you think, Vicky?
Yes, I agree. I think that kind of it's about being mindful, isn't it, and respectful of people in the group, and ensuring that everyone has space to share their ideas, and that some people also will like to sit and absorb, and they will be doing all their thinking sort of in that space, and then often, the light bulb will come on, I think, later on, and perhaps that's a good point for me to say that I'm my contact details, I'm very happy for them to be shared, and if people do have those light bulb moments and want someone to just fire an email to bounce ideas around, then I'm really, really happy to be that person, and to sort of help develop and share thinking. I know that sometimes happens for me. I can be sitting and listening and thinking, everything sounds amazing, and then sort of later down the line I think, that's what I might like to do. So
thank you. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I think the reality is, sorry, I keep using that word, but I think that the experience shows that quite often somebody would have 20 minutes need 20 minutes to explore the topic, and it could be that somebody else isn't at that stage of readiness, but actually gets quite a lot of further stimulus from the 20 minutes of the first person. So it's difficult apportioning it. I think that certainly, I suppose if you had a cut-off of, say, 10 minutes, that the first person who's very enthusiastic would take things from what the other people were saying as well. And it could be that after 10 minutes, we say, would people like to move on? The rest of the group might say, can we get this one bottomed out? Because we're all getting something from it. So I think maybe have a nominal 10 minutes each. And then, yes, I would imagine in a group of 5, there's probably one person who's bursting with an idea, 2 people who got an idea that they're not quite sure about, and 1 person who forgot they were meant to have an idea for today. That's just my experience of the way it goes. So, I think providing that yourself or the person running the group ensures everybody, gets invited in to contribute. I don't think we need worry too much, but I think certainly let's please get the people's ideas. I mean, Joanne, have you got an idea that you want to, something you're working on, you want to explore?
I have a little bit, yeah.
Oh,
I know already. Maybe. I don't think we reflect properly as practitioners from some of the staff that I work with. I think we do that instant reflection when we walk out of the classroom and we think, oh, that went right, that went wrong. But then I don't think we really analyse that much further to be able to have an impact next time. So I'd like to do something about that coaching type reflection kind of activity, maybe.
And are you thinking of that being something, when you say coaching, would you think there'll be someone else in that conversation? So you're thinking about, rather than individual reflection, that becomes a conversation? What are your thoughts?
I think so. I like the use of video sometimes, and I think when it belongs to the person taking the video and it's their practice and only they control that, then I think that can be quite a nice tool if they then use that as a basis for discussion. But it's how well that's used or how effectively that's used, and I don't think that's being utilised enough. So I think as a possible intervention, or innovative way of looking at things and getting technology in there too, is about using video as a form of reflection, but better.
Like this somehow? Are you imagining that video would be something where you could use two people talking, or do you mean a video actually in the classroom where the teacher controls videoing, teaching, learning?
Yeah, I think the video in the classroom so they can then later on reflect. I know research sort of suggests that you need time to come out of that situation before you can actually reflect on the practice. And we don't do that. I don't think we really do that. I think we think about things a little bit too quick, straight away, react and move on. I don't think we really do anything with that reflection. And I think if it's on video and you can go back and you can get in that habit of going back and looking again and having something to compare. So if you're doing a video with one class and then you think, oh, could be trying something new or not, and record the same class again in a week, 2 weeks' time, then you'll be able to see a difference in their behaviour and your behaviour, the little things that you could do differently. It may not be a big thing, it might just be the welcome at the door, or how you close the session down. It could be anything. But I think until you've seen yourself in practice a couple of times, you've got nothing to compare with.
So you've created an idea which is giving you your research methods as well, isn't it? Because it's the video which is going to be something that you can go back to as evidence or a means by which you can listen to yourself. What about the learners? What are your thoughts around getting learners involved? Would the video point to them or to the teacher, or is this something that you want to investigate further?
I think that would depend on the member of staff and what they were doing, because although it might be sort of my practitioner research to see if that makes a difference, it would be up to them because it would be them in practice. So
is the underlying issue, the structural issue, the fact that you're required to go and observe people teach? Right. So for your action research, could you suggest to them, but rather than me come and watch you teach, would you do a video of your class and bring me about 10 minutes of the 3 most successful activities you did in that class?
Well, I'm thinking that because we are at the point of the academic year where everyone will have been observed by now, and after that observation, we always have coaching conversations, and people are coming with strengths and also areas for development. So if an individual member of staff came with an area of development and could potentially concentrate on that the next time they went in the classroom and recorded just that bit, something that they were going to do differently for that bit of development, and then to be able to reflect to see if it's worked and have that conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if you identified in your practice that questioning was something you struggle with, then let's try to, and I tried assertive questioning as a new technique, and it felt a bit difficult because I was having to sort of not give the answer and just carry on trying to get other learners to come up with the answer around the room. You would want to know whether that had become so unnatural that learners were getting frustrated, or whether that was actually truly making it more inclusive.
Because I think something like that you might be able to see rather than feel, or rather than really recognise when you're in the moment in the teaching. But if you're watching it back, then maybe that might come out more. It might be, I don't know.
So what do you imagine might change as a result of the activity that you do, and from now to what it would be like if this works, Joanne?
For me, I think the coaching conversations would change to be more developmental rather than critical. As a practitioner, I would like to think that I'd be wanting to improve practice. So if it was me recording me, I would want to pick up and develop my own practice and try things differently, but without it being under observation. So it's more supportive. Do you know what I mean?
You take more risks because you're in control of the video that gets produced, rather than thinking somebody could walk in any minute and judge me on this.
And you're also in control of sharing that video, if you do it all, or whether you just keep it and invite someone in to have that conversation, in that safe place, rather than it being published anywhere or shared in any format. It would be a case of, okay, this is my personal device. I'm recording it on my personal device, and I'm asking you to come and sit with me to watch after I've actually looked at it myself, and there's things I want to pick up or not.
So as a sector, there's a big petition out at the moment to try to change the way Ofsted works, away from the grading structure to become more developmental. And people are saying, well, should Ofsted change altogether? Rather than being people that come in and look at what we do, then organisations should be able to self-assess. And an organisation like Ofsted then has quite a different role of helping us to look at our self-assessments. If we take that to practitioner level, you're now positioning observations as being much more about self-assessment than an outsider coming in and making judgments on criteria which they set. So actually this is in, rather than sitting there with an observation sheet, I don't know how you do them. Maybe you do quite free observations where you just write what you see rather than following a checklist. But still, the idea that I pick what it is that you are going to work with me on could have implications for how teachers feel about observations.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, because we have people walking in and out of our classrooms all the time, and they might not be there for 10 minutes, they might be there for 45. But I think having that ownership, this is my classroom, my space, my learners, and we want to do it like this. I think that it is shifting that power balance, if you like, back to the practitioner, to say, well, don't judge me on an hour, but here's all this footage. Here's all the developments, the progress I'm making. This is how I'm feeling. This could be the supportive documentation that goes with that. If that's like over a longer period of time. It could even show, the PSD themes or students changing embedded behaviours. So are they behaving the same way with one member of staff as they are with another, or from September to May, do the students change? I think there's a lot of different angles that we could possibly pick up on. And I know that could be huge. And I know this is about making things small and manageable, and, you know, seeing if it makes a difference and how. I think there's a big idea, and I know I need to scale it right down.
Maybe it's about just a couple of teachers doing it, and then asking. I don't know how you all feel, but observation always felt like it was something done to me for somebody else's priorities. I didn't always used to think I changed much as a practitioner as a result, but my organisation got some nice data which they could talk about. But so perhaps questioning teachers as a result of this about what benefits they could see observation had for their practice will bring this back to say, well, what difference does this make to learners? Because after all, that's what we're here for.
Could you try, say keep it small scale, keep it simple? Could you begin in what you may call the reconnaissance phase, or the starting point? Could you video yourself teaching a lesson and try and apply all of the sort of conditions that you would try and get another teacher to do? So just see how videoing yourself, and say, like in the idea of finding the most successful 3 things you did in that lesson. Because the idea behind that is, I would ask somebody to do that, is when finding the 3 most successful things, then you start off from the starting point. Most teachers, that would be a good thing. They would, once they'd had their strengths validated, they'd be more willing to acknowledge areas for development. And if they don't own the areas for development, they can never work on them. They can work around them. And most teachers are pretty good at that. But I think that the strategy of using it might be well tested if you tried it on yourself and you realised when you decided what the 3 best bits were, that might help, or it would make you realise what the 3 worst bits were as well. And, so just, I mean, that's really small scale. Now, in some ways, it should help you improve what's happening here, because you will then become aware of certain psychological constraints that you're under when you do this self-examination. And because you're a sensitive individual, that would then inform the way that you advise the other people for whom you're responsible. Now, I would try it on yourself and maybe try it with one other person. If I can give you a little anecdote, I once videoed myself. You know how marking's dead boring? And you get a mark. I thought, I wonder why it is. And so I videoed myself marking at home in the kitchen one morning using a video with a taped 1 second in every 10. It was quite interesting because in the first piece of work I picked up were the better bits of work, and I liked them because it fed back to me exactly what I'd said and even added a few new ideas. So I thought this was really brilliant work. And I was sitting there very poised with me hand gently resting, one hand with a pen, writing, very positive comments, the other hand resting on the desk very calmly. And then I got to reading the last thing, which was actually a trainee teacher's reflections on a lesson, where she said the lesson went really well. She said they all sat quietly while I gave the lecture, you see. And it was totally self-unaware, and I was sitting there, and I was pulling my hair out, and and it was quite interesting because from that I realised that I don't find marking boring. I find that it's the ultimate evaluation of how my teaching just doesn't work. And the question I was torn with, is it, do they hand in crap because I don't explain things very well? Or is it because they've got such little respect for us, they think anything will do? But both things, so I had this book, you could say, cognitive side of us, just looking how well am I explaining things, and the emotional side, how much do they value me? And I found that quite interesting. And of course, the reason I liked the really good student was they reflected my prowess as a teacher. And so the marking was a highly emotional experience rather than a boring one. But like all young people, you can never admit to being embarrassed or humiliated. So you say something's boring if you find it. Just,
it's a good story.
I just add a little endnote to that. I was so excited by this that when my wife Bernie came in, I said, "Hey Bernie," I said, "you must have a look at this. I've been videoing myself marking." And she looked at us like I was, well, she's used to us, but still. So I put this video on and I said, look at how I'm sitting, all calm, look at my body language. Now look at my body language when I'm marking. I'm not bored at all, I'm really stressed. I said, "That's fantastically interesting." I said, "I can't wait to go and show them down to university." "There's no way you're showing that." I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Have you seen the state of that kitchen?"
Yeah.
Sorry, but what I'm trying to say is that the videoing is quite, it's quite important, and I think you're right. It's incredibly useful, but it's how you manage to get them on board to take ownership of it, and that's why I'm suggesting start small.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing it for a project, it will give you loads to write about. Makes you a bit self-obsessed, mind.
But there'll be things you hadn't imagined. What do you do when a learner asks a question that really challenges you, or that means that you have to say something that you wouldn't necessarily want to be in the public sphere? Is it that moment where you turn the camera off? There'll be things that you encounter which mean that I think it's a really good idea to do it yourself first, because you can then you could even present your video to peers, and that would be really leveling to say, listen, you can watch me if you want to, and this is what I did. And that's kind of scary, but I would be made up if an observer did that to me.
Yeah. Well, you can bring out the best 3 points and the worst 3 points. It'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, so we've got to think about next steps. And Andy, Vicky, and Joe, I know you're still there, but I know you may not want to do so. It's up to you. Does anyone else want to do any practitioner research? And I'm thinking we've got colleagues who are going to join this meeting who at this point probably should press pause and have a think, and we'll be waiting to hear what you think. But does anyone else want to share? Vicky, have you got something you'd like to do?
Yeah, there is something I'm quite interested in, and recently Claire and I and another colleague David, we've been working on a report. We've been writing a report, but we've also been writing alongside the report. We've been writing a practitioner's guide, and we were thinking a lot about how to make it something that's meaningful for practitioners, that makes people want to pick it up, that helps them. I think someone's already said something about the way that as practitioners we're really lucky, because we don't have to read before we do. We can do, and then we can build on what we do through reading. Whereas perhaps if you're an academic, you need to read first because there's less of the opportunity to do the doing. You have to read to then, I don't know, secure your funding so you can then go and do your field work. But it's all like it's almost the other way around, I think, for us, and I think that's where we're really lucky. And so it's got me thinking about, what do we do? How do we make reading appealing, interesting, accessible, meaningful, something that actually as a practitioner I think, do you know what, I do want to pick that up and I want to have a look at that and I think that's going to help my practice, because it's something I was pondering, and I'm just wondering, it's like a real like hatchling idea, but whether there is some space for research there around how we take policy or guidelines or things that as teachers we have to read, we have to engage with, how to take something like that and make it feel like something we want to do rather than something we have to do, and how we present that. So thinking about language, layout, imagery. So yeah, it's just like a tiny idea, but I don't know, maybe something to think about.
So in the year 2000, the new London group came together to look at multiliteracies. Well, some were looking at multiliteracies and multimodality, and the fact that we read more than the written word, and that we often don't teach people or give people materials that have got all those different modes of meaning, and it's become more important as we've gone online, because obviously the way we set out a page isn't just about words. When you were starting to draw, when we were doing that guide and you started to draw some of these really difficult concepts, it made me sit up and go, my God, that's just that drawing you've just done immediately untangled something that was so complicated because of the language and because of the way it had been presented for years. It was just a moment where I think, oh, that just captured it in a single drawing. Would it be those kind of things, Vicky, how drawing and layout can express ideas really clearly?
I think so, yeah, that kind of thing, and maybe thinking in how we support how we support other practitioners to get involved in action research, but also how we get learners engaged as well. And so that action research becomes something that learners want to do. They might want to explore things within the context of their learning, which would be really, really exciting. Sort of almost like making that cycle sort of really, really sing. Because I think sometimes we're great at having ideas and then bringing learners in, but wouldn't it be brilliant if our learners were having the ideas, and how we kind of make research, action research, sort of a part of all aspects of our teaching and learning and engagement, and yeah, and how we do that. So that's what I was thinking, sort of in terms of imagery and the way that we present it, how we write about it.
So there's a new project starting, our OTLA in English, and maybe this is an opportunity for you to see what materials are developed as part of that programme and how you could do them differently.
Yeah, I think the key point is in making it small enough to start off with, that you might look at one handout,
yeah,
rather than reading as such, and the insights you get from that will inform other things. But keeping it small, because that means any changes you make would be easily evaluated by others. It makes it more manageable, I think.
And the programme that we're doing at the moment, you could take the practitioner research guide that we worked on a couple of years ago, didn't we? And maybe as a group of people who are involved in the programme, you could bring it to us as a peer group, if you like, to see how different that might be.
Yes.
And also the one that you just worked on, it will be very interesting to see whether the governors in the prisons who get it find that, well, the litmus test will be, do they blooming open the front page, Vicky? That would be the one, because they don't tend to read very much. I'm sorry to any governors out there, I'm sure you're very well read, but they're very busy people. And so the idea of sitting down and reading a book is, well, I mustn't make sweeping statements. I can't imagine that happens very often when we send in materials. I've got this sneaky feeling they are going to read the one that you've worked on, because it does look like you want to open it up and get started. It's really practical. Okay, I'm going to put the slides up. Our Joe, if you want to join in, then at any point you're more than welcome. Andy, if you want to carry on the tradition of doing action research around an action research program and you want to do something as well, then that sounds good to me. But have you, before I move on, has anyone got?
And the New English project, but changing the way that we respond to projects. So instead of them telling us what they're going to do, they tell us what they'd like to do. And we suggest how they might best work with others and best research it. And that gives us a unique opportunity to both evaluate what we've done in the past and just to see if we can improve what's been happening here. Because you wouldn't believe this, Joanne. In some projects, not everybody who's involved in them is a volunteer. And it's basically, it's about, not everybody will necessarily be a volunteer, but it's that old thing, you know, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, and our job is to make them thirsty. So it's how so I think we'll certainly be experimenting with that and seeing what new knowledge we generate.
The difference is going to be, so Joanne, what we're talking about here is another OTLA that's starting, and this one's got a theme of English, and it's going to be over the whole of England. And Andy, I'm thinking about the fact that we won't be doing big launch events. We'll be doing those quite grounded, instead of organisations coming together, Joanne, and saying, well, I want to work with blah blah college and blah blah word-based learning provider. Individual organisations will apply, and then the core team will be saying, well, you seem to have quite a similar idea, let's get together and see if we can make a project. So that's it. And then actually there might be some links between what you want to work on, Vicky, and what you want to work on, Andy, because there seems to be something there about the literatures that we put out as well. And
Definitely, I can see a real crossover there. So I think that could be a dual effort, Andy. So
Yes, I mean so I would enjoy that.
Okay, so I'm going to pop some slides up on the screen. I'm thinking about our colleagues who are watching this from afar, and I just there's a couple of points that I wanted to share. I'm not going to go through them all. And let me just share properly, and then we'll get in. So that's the one. If you want to think about keeping a reflective journal, and you're more than welcome to have a look at the PD North site, where there's loads of ideas about doing this on your phone, or making a mind map, or graphic organizer, or even using Padlet to make reflective journals. It's entirely up to you, but we were asked when we first set up the professional exchange, which is 3 years ago now, will you use this particular journal and have it as one of the KPIs to hand into the foundation? And we felt quite resistant to this, because the whole idea of a personal learning journal is it should be your own. It's not really something that should be submitted. So we dug our heels in and said no. But what we did do is think, well, actually, if you think that you're not sure how to do this, there might be some ideas. So there's a link there if you want to find out more about some different ways that you can keep a journal. And of course, that journal would then become part of that evidence, or Andy, you talked in a much better way than evidence earlier, what we might do to convince our colleagues, or to share with our colleagues.
Yes. So what would persuade our colleagues to take up the idea that the change that we'd actually intended had been effective enough for them to want to do it as well with their learners?
I'm going to do the same thing. I don't do loads of training, but I've got lots of colleagues who train, and so I would need to convince them that they too need to think about flipped learning and follow up, not just doing it for a tick box exercise, that it could actually add value to a training course. You can keep in touch through PDN Reflect, which is a little hashtag we use on Twitter when people share ideas. We don't have to do it this way. And in fact, to put a bullet point up on this screen about what are we going to use as a group to keep in touch, what could be our shared space. And there are a couple of different ideas. Some people use Padlets. You can see a Padlet here from the PD Yorkshire and Humberside Learning and Skills Exchange, and they share resources and ideas. We could use Edmodo if we want to. I'm going to just suggest that for this meeting, we send out the link to the video to you all who couldn't be here today, along with the case study, the short example of some practitioner action research from Amanda, kindly written by Andy. So thank you, Andy, because I think that's going to make a real difference to how people understand this going forward. And then when we get back together in meeting 2, let's make a decision about whether we want a shared space. Do we want a Padlet for our group where we can post things? Do we want to have a little Edmodo group, a network where we can work together? There's a Twitter handle on there, and we have somebody in the team called Lou who can always help with technology. I think we'll probably be okay as a group because between us we should be able to work through, but as a member of PD North, you're more than welcome to contact Lou anytime if you want to ask about digital approaches, and Lou's contact details are there. There's a slide here about sharing work. Now, you'll be really familiar with this, Joanne, because you had to make a small newsletter as part of the digital projects. But you could do that's a newsletter, but you don't have to. You could write a short blog or an article, but you don't have to. Going up and standing in front of your colleagues in the staff room is perfectly brilliant and might make a difference to other people's practice. We have a blog. If you want to write for that, you can go onto our website, which is pdnorth.org.uk, and there's a really interesting blog up there by somebody called Sue Keenan at the moment, who's been talking about what makes for great teaching. We've had people exploring lots of different ideas, and there's quite a back catalogue now of some interesting blogs from teachers across the sector. Oh, and managers. Sue Keenan's head of CPD at Myers Co College in the Northwest. You might want to come to a FE research meet. There's one in Ashton College taking place soon, but they happen across the country. And as I said at the beginning, there are in May going to be some events, one in the Northeast, one in Yorkshire and Humberside, and one in the Northwest. And if I was really smart, I could even tell you when they were. So those of you listening in would know that the event in the Northwest is on the 3rd of May, and that's going to be in Liverpool. The event in the Northeast is going to be on the 10th of May, and that's at Durham Cricket Club. And the event in Yorkshire and Humberside is on the 24th of May, and that's going to be held in Leeds, at the Novotel in Leeds. Now, that's not saying you need to come along and present your findings. My goodness, that would be a fast project. Let's come along and be part of the day and take part in some CPD, maybe even leading some CPD. I'll talk to you about that later, some of you. Anyway, that's a collaborative day that if you're a PD North member will be fully funded. There's our website. Go and find out more. Go and have a look at the blog. There is a forum on there. It's not very well used. I think we might take it down. One of those pieces of practitioner research on the go to find out that people don't really like adding things to forums. But I mean, maybe we just haven't done it right. There's a project in there somewhere. But you can see all of the things that people have submitted from previous projects. We have a newsletter. There's a blog, as I said, up there. And there's Vicky's contact details if you want to share any information for there, because Vicky's looking after that at the moment. And then, okay, this is something to think about. I'm conscious that it's coming towards the end of the meeting and I want to finish quite promptly at 5 o'clock. When you get these slides after the session or you're watching the video, I'd like you to think about some of the professional standards that you might be working on as you do this project. So, number one, reflect on what works best in your teaching and learning to meet the diverse needs of learners. That seems like a bit of a no-brainer. You're definitely going to be doing that. Maybe you'd be creative and innovative in selecting and adapting strategies. So I just want you to think about these on a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 is I've got quite a long way to go to do this, and 5 is I feel quite confident I do this well. And then at the end of the programme, we'll come back and think whether or not there's been a difference against those professional standards. And there really doesn't have to be. It's just asking you to think about what that means in terms of a framework for teaching, learning and assessment that we've used across the sector. Number 8 seems pretty good as well. Maintain and update your knowledge of educational research to develop evidence-based practice. We could do with unpicking that a bit further when we come together next time. What does that mean? What do we mean by evidence-based practice? Because it's a term that's used quite a lot in the sector, and I think we could do with talking about it. So if you go to that link at the bottom, there is a way that you can self-assess on the professional standards and print out what you've done so that you've got a record. So we will ask you to do it at the end and see what difference it's made. I'm just conscious we've got a chat in there, and it might be Vicky saying I've finally been kicked out of the oh no, it's not, it's Joe giving all the venue details for the event. So if you want to find out where those events are, that's in chat at the moment for people who are in the room. If you're not in the room, then you can go on to the PD North website where that's all listed as well. Okay, these are people sharing at previous events. So there we have Anthony talking about some work he was doing, digital maths approaches. There were some people talking about doing an activity where they asked learners to draw, I think, how they felt about what they were doing. This is a research technique. There's some little books that got made in maths by a teacher that was working on a programme. And that's one of those lovely cartoons we draw when we go to events, somebody talking about what it was like to be, oh, here, look, Joanne, that's right for you. Am I being watched and observed? That's very apt, isn't it, for what you want to do? Okay, so I'm just going to take us on. So the only thing that's left to do, and I ask those people listening in just to think now, what have you shared and discussed today, and what are you going to do before your next meeting? And it says here, when and where will your remaining meetings take place? Well, we've already got that decided, so we know our meeting dates, and if you're not sure about those, we'll send them out again when we send out this video, so you've got them in your diary. You can join us on Twitter. There's a lot of stuff for you to read here which you can just take away, but that's our Twitter page and the hashtag CPD North when we do a CPD. We'll move on from that. And there's Vicky's contact details again. So let me stop sharing. And I think for those of you who've been listening in, I'm going to stop the recording now, and we really look forward to seeing you again. Who's got the date of the next meeting handy so I don't have to go? Has anyone got that handy? I can find it out quite quickly. Let me just have a look. Before we stop this recording, I should have had this to hand. I think I can very quickly have a look.
Hold on, I know.
Joe knows.
Monday the 29th of April.
Brilliant. Okay, so that's going to be when we get to meet those of you who have come along. Vicky, I thought you got kicked out of the cafe then, and that was it. They said, we've had enough of you. You've only drunk 2 cups of tea. Are you all right?
Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
No worries at all. We're just tying off. I'm going to stop the recording now and say goodbye to everyone who's listening in. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you on the 29th of April, which has just popped up in chat now.